All right, people, we are ready to begin our back set of notes. Those of you that had asked on the one pager, it was 50 out of 50. On Harmony, I put 60 points. It was only supposed to be 50 points, so I changed that back. So please thank Carly for bringing that to my attention, because all of you look like you lost 10 points for no reason. The one pager for, and this is probably what I was thinking, for this time will be worth a little bit more because it's a bigger in-depth question. Yes. Revolutionary War. So we are now moving into this idea of revolution, or really honestly, what we're at this point is rebellion. We are in open rebellion. And that will be the way that we look at this for a while. We haven't yet mentioned the word independence, revolution. We're talking about, again, open rebellion. And this is, again, the way that the colonists have responded to a lot of different crises up to this point. Not Stono Rebellion, Lisler's Rebellion, Bacon's Rebellion. That's been kind of the idea that there's this idea of this open kind of revolt. So make sure on page 11 and 12, you really look at those strengths and weaknesses, and most specifically, you're able to come up with the ones that are more difficult, right? It's easy to see what the weaknesses are of the colonies, because there are a lot. Make sure that you're able to name those strengths as well. So as we move into the next section of our note, the American Revolution, it begins with the Second Continental Congress. So the First Continental Congress said, let's get a militia ready. States, get your militia ready. And B, we're going to boycott everything. We're going to boycott sending you our stuff. We're going to boycott buying your stuff. We're going to boycott using any kinds of stuff. So that's the First Continental Congress. The Second Continental Congress, and again, please note the date. We're still in 1775. We're another whole year away from this idea of independence, even at Lexington and Concord. Not talking about independence, not talking about the idea of creating this new country. We're still angry at Parliament. And most of you that missed anything on that quiz, you missed that, what the First Continental Congress. They pledged their sovereignty to their king. We're not talking about overthrowing a king. We're talking about being angry at Parliament. That's the taxation without representation, not this idea of no king. At this point, there is not a place on the world or in the world that does not have a royal monarch, especially in Europe. There just isn't. That's the setup that everyone recognizes. It's the setup of what has run Europe for hundreds and hundreds of years. So no one is even contemplating, let's get rid of this king thing and start our own country. At the Second Continental Congress, the other major difference is all 13 colonies are here. So now we've moved to where all 13 colonies maybe don't agree, but they recognize that it's important to be in the room and to have representation at this Second Continental Congress. Again, still not interested in independence. No one is talking independence. That is not on their mind. What they are discussing are their grievances. And again, a grievance is the list of things that I think that you have done wrong to me. Most significant act of this Congress is we decide to go to war. Second Continental Congress is about war, and Second Continental Congress is when they get George Washington to lead the Continental Army. Again, this is a political choice. George Washington had not at this point made himself the exceptional leader that he will become. He's really a guy that lost the first time that he went out. He also happens to be three things that really stand out. He's really tall, he's a redhead, and for Massachusetts, he's from Virginia. And they need the Virginians on their side to kind of bring up these southern colonies up to speed with where Massachusetts and at this point Pennsylvania is. And so again, this is really, really important that we do two things. In the Continental Congress, we declare war, but we also write stuff down. And this will be the role of both Thomas Jefferson and Mr. Dickinson. Declaration of the causes and necessity of taking up arms. This is the awesome part about all of this movement, is that they name these things pretty much exactly what they're talking about. Drafted a second set of appeals to the king and British people. And they are not addressing, again, to Parliament. They're trying to talk to the king, and they're saying to the king, hey, king, we as your subject think that you need to take a look at what Parliament is doing to us. We don't know that if you are aware of that or not, but this is something that you need to look into. This is, again, an intermediate step toward the Declaration of Independence, still not, again, a year away. And then the third thing that they do is set out a plan to raise money and to create an army and a navy. Obviously, the army makes sense, right? We need feet on the ground, but we certainly will need a navy, and we will be trying to create the strength of a navy to protect our shores. So if we can protect our shores and prevent these British ships from getting in and bringing either supplies or more troops, that will help our cause much more so than army, because if we can keep them from getting on the shore, we keep them out of the fight. We also write an olive branch petition, and I do not mean to be condescending, but I hope most of you know that an olive branch is symbolic of a making of peace. Like you offer an olive branch to kind of say, hey, let's sit down and talk about this, and let's see if we can work this out with our words instead of with our guns. This is written by John Dickinson. And again, it's a last-ditch effort by moderates. So when we look at the Continental Congress, we again have those three groups of people represented. We have our radicals represented by Sam Adams and his bunch. We have our conservatives represented mostly by our southern states. And then we have our moderates, especially those from around that mid-Atlantic states, Pennsylvania. And they're saying, let's not jump. Let's walk this slowly. Let's talk about these things. Let's offer the opportunity to sit down and discuss. But always the problem is, if the Crown recognizes all of these things, they recognize the right for that Second Continental Congress to exist. And that's a problem. That's going to be the big problem at this point. And always when historians who love what ifs, this is the biggest what if. What if, at this point, Parliament would have taken or listened to what the Second Continental Congress and treated them not even as equals, but at least treated them with the respect of listening and responding to the documents that they produced, and which they don't. Most historians believe, obviously, the revolution would have happened and we would have been a colony at least probably until the mid-1800s, late 1800s, when the idea of imperialism kind of goes out of date. But they don't pay any attention. They refuse to recognize Congress. They refuse the right for them to exist. And then again, we'll hear begin this war. Look again before we move on to D2. Again, in the olive branch, pledged loyalty to the crown. These people do not want to overthrow a king. They don't want to get rid of a king. They don't want to think about a place without a king. When we get to the point where we have our constitutional convention and we're going to decide to elect a president, it takes them 3 months to figure out what to call him. And all throughout the war, George Washington is referred to as Your Excellency. And there's a lot of people that want to call President, Your Majesty, because that's what we know and that's what we do. And that's how we've always recognized a leader as a monarch. And so it is difficult. And I think it's hard to understand because, again, we know how the story ends. But at this point, you have to accept that these people had zero thoughts of overthrowing their crown. It was beyond their belief system to take part in that. So we've got a couple of battles that were going to take place. And again, significant in this first year that this is rebellion. This is not a revolutionary war yet. This is open rebellion. This is something that the crown sees as small little flames of fires that they need to put down quickly from these rebellious colonies across the sea. And that's how both the king and parliament and people in England feel about them in particular. So one of our first ones that's really important is at Ticonderoga, and we'll meet two people, Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold. Benedict Arnold is part of and was part of the Sons of Liberty. Again, because we know what's going to happen, I think most of you know the name Benedict Arnold. If you don't, you know that it's probably not a good name that goes with it, but with his, or good thoughts that go with his name. But he's a really important military leader at the beginning of this war, and how he accelerates his cause and puts the colonists in a good spot. So they take Ethan Allen and his Green Mountain Boys of Vermont, Benedict Arnold of Connecticut, surprise, and will capture British garrison. A garrison is the same thing as a fort, but it's a little bit more organized than a fort. It has a lot more troops and munitions. And for us at the beginning of this, that's really important because we don't have stuff. We don't have enough physical munitions on hand to start or engage in a long, protracted war. On the bottom of the page is Bunker Hill, and Bunker Hill is a result of Lexington and Concord. So we've pushed the British back to Boston, and Bunker Hill actually takes place on Breed's Hill. I don't know why we always do this in our history. We change the names of places, but it actually takes place on Breed's Hill. Colonists will seize Breed's Hill, so we're at a really good spot, right? If you are a military strategist, you always want high ground, right? You're up high, everyone looks down. It only works if you're holding high ground and you have a lot of supplies. If you're holding high ground and you don't have a lot of supplies, you're going to be in trouble as your supplies start to rise, to fall out, because the ability to get new supplies is pretty much zero, right? Because you're going to be surrounded, especially if you're on a hill. So that's what happens. The colonists take the top of the hill, a good spot, but the colonists don't have enough supplies. And so they're surrounded by the well-trained, well-supplied British army. There are about 1,000 of them. I mean, we're not talking a little group. We're talking 1,000 oncoming redcoats, and will be mowed down by 1,500. Americans will kill 140. But as you look at B3, all of that runs out as soon as we run out of gunpowder. So we're going to run out of gunpowder. And this is the age of weapons where you need the gunpowder to ignite so that it sends out the projectile. And without gunpowder, you have no weapons. There are no weapons. Now, here is a thing that is uniquely always American. We lose Bunker Hill. We lose, right? This is General Prescott saying, don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes, because we cannot waste anything. You have to see somebody up close and personal before you shoot, because every bullet needs to count. The colonists create, create large casualties in the British Army, but this is a loss. It is 100% a loss. We have to flee, we have to run. And if you look at B4, viewed as American victory due to British heavy losses. It is the bloodiest battle. This will be the bloodiest battle. It's up close, it's personal. We're going to lose a lot of people. But the history of the United States is filled with these giant losses that somehow we celebrate as victorious, and I think that's part of our mentality. The other one that comes quickly to mind is the Alamo. Remember the Alamo, and the Alamo's this great, but everybody dies in the Alamo. Like, they all die. How is that something you want to remember and be proud of? And used to get me in a lot of trouble in Texas when we were there, and I would say, everybody died here, but it's the Alamo. And everybody died. Like, I don't get it. I don't get it. My dad would say, I'm calling back your Texas DNA. I'm like, you can have it. Have all my Texas DNA. Take it all. So, yeah, my dad was not a big fan when I would start talking about Texas history. Like, yeah, okay. And again, reminding you that he made me miss questions because he ensured me that the largest state was Texas. Ensured. Like, no, my teacher says it's Alaska. No, it's not. It's Texas. No, it's not. So anyway, and my dad's name was Tex. It really wasn't Tex. That was his nickname, but that's how much he loved Texas. So following at the top of page 2, following Bunker Hill, the king now says, you people are in a state of rebellion. So the king declares rebellion in 1775. This means, again, to the colonist, and this is important now, because one of the things that we have to convince is everyone to be part of this war. We need all 13 colonies. So when the king says we're in open rebellion, he says all colonists are in open rebellion. And this second step that he takes is a step that, had the king not done this, maybe would have changed again the course of the war. So the king says, open rebellion. I will teach you colonists. I'm going to send mercenaries, not just any mercenaries, but these German Hessians hired by the king, who are notoriously known for their prowess as military people. This is top notch. These are elite. These are who you hire when you want the best. And the colonists, who still see themselves as British, saying, are you kidding me? You just hired mercenaries to come and kill us? This would be the same to the colonists as if the king sent Hessians to Manchester to put down a rebellion. Like, you wouldn't send Hessians to put down an open rebellion in Manchester over a strike about coal mines. That's ridiculous. How you think of us to use this type of a response. And this really, of anything else that we've discussed, this really changes that 1/3 of people, right? That 1/3 who says, our king just called out hitmen to come put down a rebellion in our own country. And this, again, marks a really important part of both A, where the king was really ill-advised, and B, people like Sam Adams in the background saying, yes, yes, okay, they're on, everybody's going to be on our side. Thank you, king. You played into our hands. Americans, again, shocked that a king would hire soldiers known for their brutality. These Hessians this is an elite group. This is SEALs, Army Rangers, cutthroat. Some even say they're like the mafia, the mob. These are not normal, like, troops. These are specially trained troops. Hidden in here, just because I like to keep putting it in there, Americans failed to successfully invade Canada again in October 1775. We're going to try this so many times. So at this point, we start thinking about independence. Again, most Americans did not desire independence, proud to be British citizens. But the reasons, again, for that changing of loyalty is B1. Please don't lose sight of that. It is one of the most important ones. It's one that you're often questioned about because it's one the average American doesn't know, right? I don't know, by watching whatever that dude is that pulls people off the streets and asks them questions, I am just astonished. I saw one that popped up on my YouTube thing because I was putting my videos on there about people trying to name countries. Like they had a big map and said, can you name a country? Like a country, like any country, like China. People kept pointing to Africa, and everybody, Africa is a continent. It's not a country. Like, can you name a country? I don't know if they just, and I'm sure it's a comedy show, but like, I'm sure they do that for the fun factor. But finally, a little kid named like 30 in like 60 seconds. I'm like, thank you, little kid. Anyway, most Americans would not list that as a reason for, they could not name countries. I was perplexed. So these are the reasons that I give you, because these are the reasons that the College Board likes to see. And probably most of you don't know these, I don't think. The Hessians, the burning of Falmouth and Norfolk. The British are going to burn these towns. They're going to burn Norfolk. Norfolk is in Virginia, and it is a deep water port. It's where our big Navy base is in Norfolk. The Governor of Virginia promised freedom, B3. That's a giant one. The governor of Virginia promised freedom to slaves who would fight for Britain. Again, all three of these are really stupid mistakes that the British make in moving people who really didn't support a revolution to this idea of revolution. They are really dumb mistakes. And then one of the most important things is C, and I would make a box around C. This is our first book and name that we need to know. You need to know, bless you. You need to know Thomas Paine, and you need to know common sense. Thomas Paine is an Englishman. He's born in England. He is part of the Enlightenment. He is a deist, and he writes a very simple pamphlet called Common Sense. And that's what this book is, this little pamphlet is about. Common Sense becomes an instant bestseller. It is incredibly effective propaganda. One, because it's written in plain words. So it's not this highfalutin academic intellect that people can't understand. And he boils this argument down to common sense, not academia, not intellectual, not using these things that the common folk can't understand. But he says, based on these four things, colonial policies are inconsistent. This is like, again, like I tell you, your parents that say, if you break curfew, you're going to be on restriction for 2 weeks, and then you break curfew and you go out the next night. It's inconsistent. I know I don't know those people. But it's inconsistent. And what that inconsistency brings is the idea that we're better off on our own. You take a tax, you give us a tax, you repeal a tax, you burn things, you give us things back. You're inconsistent. You don't deserve to be and remember, this is a mother-child relationship. You don't deserve to be our parent. 2B is the one that makes the most common sense. Nowhere in the physical universe did a smaller heavenly body control a larger one. So what Thomas Paine is saying is, show me where something little controls something big. Very simple. Great Britain, little teeny tiny place, colonies, gigantic. How does that even make sense? That something small controls something large. And that, again, is part of this common sense. C is an interpretation of Thomas Paine, and this, again, is part of his Enlightenment kind of thing. King was nothing more than a royal brute of Great Britain. He was just a brute. And then 2D is what American colonists picked up. And this is what we take forward out of this American Revolution. We move this thought forward until into the 21st century and into as far as you guys will take it. This idea that America had a sacred mission, a moral obligation to the world to set up an independent democratic republic, untainted by association with corrupt monarchical Britain. We see that today in the 21st century, that we have a sacred mission, an obligation for democracy, for independence, for a republic. And that comes from Thomas Paine. And it's a really important principle. It has guided us through some of our greatest moments. It's guided us through some of our deepest, darkest moments, that this is a country that has a sacred mission. And it goes all the way back to who that told us we needed to be a model city? His name? Winthrop. Jonathan Winthrop. Model city, city on a hill. You can't not make that cause and effect. We see ourselves differently. We see ourselves as this Jonathan Winthrop, city on a hill. Thomas Paine, moral, sacred obligation. And Thomas Paine is not doing this religiously, right? Winthrop, it was religious, right? This Christian moral city. Thomas Paine has moved us to the next level of this. It's not a religious obligation. It's a sacred mission for democracy. And Thomas Paine writes that in 1776. It is a great read. Those of you that enjoy reading, you can get this anywhere because it's free. It's a quick read. Randy, you're not even going to try. Okay. But it's an important part of the foundation of our country, this moral, sacred obligation to independence and democracy. And that's what sells people. People buy into this. And hopefully you see we bought into this for 250 plus years. This is an important part of America. Persuaded Congress to go all the way for independence. So June 7th, 1776, Henry Richard Lee proposes independence, and he's from Virginia. These united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. And again, motion is signed July 2nd, not July 4th. I hold my own little party July 2nd because that's the real party. July 4th is just when it's read out to everyone. That whole thing that happens in Philadelphia and getting that thing passed is fascinating story. It is such a fascinating story about politics and Sam Adams is a big mover and shaker in this whole idea of peace or independence. So at the top of page 3, formal explanation was needed. On the top of page 3, Congress appoints a committee on independence. We are all about these committees. A committee to do this, a committee to do that, a committee to see the committee. This is why when we end the war at Yorktown, we are ready to govern ourselves because we had lots of practices with this. All of these things legislatively that we've done helps us when we start our new country. So Congress appointed a committee on independence to prepare an appropriate statement shortly after Lee's speech. And that little thing becomes the Declaration of Independence. Task given to a committee that shows Thomas Jefferson. We always think of him as this alone, but the other members, please make note of 2 really important ones, Ben Franklin and John Adams, Sherman and Livingston. Here's our problem. Again, slavery, right? Heavily modified because of mostly Thomas Jefferson and Sherman and Livingston Southerners. Ben Franklin, John Adams, ready to write that out. And again, please, 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 please understand that all men are created equal. It is men. I know sometimes in elementary school, your teachers try to make that like, oh, he was talking about everybody. No, he was not. He was talking about men. And he was specifically talking about white men. And we didn't even need to qualify that by anything else other than to say men. This is not about women. This is not about humans. Thomas Jefferson knew the word humans. He could have easily said all humans are created equal. That is not a word that was invented in the 20th century. It has been around for a long time. All men are created equal, not anybody else. Jefferson had blamed England for continuing the slave trade. Even though Jefferson had a whole bunch of slaves, little 9-year-old boys making nails. No. Thomas Jefferson. Yeah. Southerners in particular still favored slavery and dismissed the clause, so it's out. Declaration not addressed to England. Declaration not addressed to England. The U.S. didn't expect a response. We're just writing it now. We know the king's not going to pay attention. And the declaration is formally approved on July 4th, which is why we celebrate that July 4th. Last for today, we're going to look at the declaration. Declaration has 3 major parts. This is what you need to look at when you're doing that worksheet on the Declaration of Independence. Your textbook in the back has the Declaration of Independence so that you can look at that to answer those questions. Declaration of Independence has 3 parts. Preamble. I give the all rights to who really wrote the preamble, even though he was dead for a while, is John Locke. John Locke is our most important Enlightenment figure. He gives us the real phrase, life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. We can already see where people like Thomas Jefferson, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston are going to say, ooh, we don't want that life, liberty, and the right to property because everybody might think they need some. So let's just change that to happiness. Happiness, that's a little less threatening. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, rather than John Locke saying the right of life, liberty, and property, that everybody should have access to property. Oh no, we don't want that. Stated the rights of colonists to break away if natural rights were violated. And there's that John Locke. If you see anything about natural rights, that's always John Locke. And what the idea, and I put property in parentheses, stated all men are created equal. And again, men. That's the first part. The second part lists 27 grievances of the colonies elected by Congress as the most important part. Underwent the most changes from the original. We started with 24, add 27. 2B, charge the king with imposing taxes without colonial consent, eliminated trial by jury, military dictatorship, maintaining standing armies in peacetime. We will not do that, and it will come back to bite us in the buttocks so many times. Cutting off trade, burning towns, hiring mercenaries, inciting American Indian violence. I would highly recommend that you look at those 27 grievances. They're really easy to read. Most of them are one sentence, and it lists all the things. When I was in the 5th grade, I got, as my mom said, a little too big for my raisin after I learned about the Declaration of Independence, and I decided to write out all the things that I had grievances about my parents. That was a really bad mistake. That's a really, really bad mistake, because then they wrote out a big old list of, all right, then you don't get this and get that. It was a dumb mistake. I will never, ever forget it. And then formal Declaration of Independence officially broke ties with England. United States, officially an independent country. Please look at G. On page 3, G is crucial. You're going to be asked why we needed to do this. Foreign aid. We are a country. You cannot give foreign aid to something that's not a country. So we are now a country, and the next thing we know, we send Ben Franklin to knock, 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 knock on the door of Louis the 16th and say, hey, let us in. We want some money. We're a country now. We don't have any. Can you give us some, please? Oh, and guess what? We're fighting Britain, and we know you hate them. So how about you give us some money? So that is essentially important. And I think that question is on that worksheet. Why did we need the Declaration of Independence? We needed to be a country so we could ask for money. All right, questions tomorrow. You will have a lecture to listen to and your quizzes. Please make sure you know that you have to take these quizzes before 3 o'clock. We have quizzes tomorrow. Oh, do we have them? No. We'll do them tomorrow. We'll do quizzes on Thursday. We'll do quizzes on Thursday, but we'll do them. I make you guys do those for homework because we got our test review. All right.